Welcome to session 1. The focus of this session is lesson planning. Before you follow the video, please consider and discuss, if possible, the following questions. What do you think about when you plan a lesson? Does your school or college have a lesson template? And are you happy with it?
Imagine you have to write a full detailed lesson plan. What do you need to consider when lesson planning? Discuss this with your colleagues or take a moment to think about it. Qualified teachers in the UK will be trained to consider the following things when lesson planning. All of these things mentioned on the slide need to have the learner at the centre. Think about the most recent group of students you taught. Who are you teaching? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Is it a mixed group? Are there different nationalities and languages? How would this affect the lesson? What is differentiation? How are you going to differentiate? Are there parts of the lesson that certain students will find more difficult or too easy? How will you plan for this? Anticipate any problems that may arise too, both with the students, the materials, the resources. For example, could a power cut or student absences affect the lesson? Aims and objectives. What's the difference between an aim and an objective? An aim considers the whole lesson, longer term and general outcomes. An objective is the shorter term and considers the aims of individual tasks. Ultimately, the aims are what you want to achieve from a lesson and why, and the objectives are how you're going to achieve it. What is the aim of a warmer? Why is it important? Talk to a colleague or think about this for a moment. Warmers set the tone of the lesson, they activate the topic language, they build rapport and ease students into the topic of the lesson. Warmers can be anything from a game that lasts 10 minutes to a quick-fire question-answer that lasts 2. It's anything to start the lesson off on the topic or theme, set the tone and get the students focusing on English. They also provide the teacher with the chance to see what mood the students are in, who is outgoing and who is quiet that day. The teacher's book includes an optional warmer for every topic in the General English series. These are suggestions and you may have your own ideas and adaptations to make. Many teachers forget or choose not to think much about timing when lesson planning. This is because they may take a more relaxed approach to tasks, hoping that it becomes more student-led. This is a good thing to keep in mind. Timing should be flexible for such occasions, but it's still important to have an idea of how long you intend to spend on each task. Again, in the teacher's book, timings are provided for each task. Timings are determined by the aims of the task and how long it should take to carry out and give feedback on. Interaction. What do we mean by this? What kinds of interaction can there be? Talk to a colleague or take a moment to think about this. You need to consider interactions for each task. This includes giving instructions from the teacher to the student, completing the task in individual, pairs or groups, and giving feedback from the students to the teacher or to each other. Also consider your interaction with the students. IRF is a traditional classroom pattern of interaction, but it does have flaws. Initiation, where the teacher asks the question, response, where the student answers, and follow-up, where the teacher says something like yes or good. But this does not represent natural communication. To add variation to this model, the teacher could ask another student to react to the first student's response, so a discussion might develop. You should also consider what the other students are doing while you're speaking to one student individually. Classroom interactional communication, or CIC, is an aspect of the language classroom to be considered. Classroom language. What do we mean by this? Why is it a consideration? Think about this for a moment or talk to a colleague. You may feel that it's unrealistic or not necessary to plan what you're going to say for a whole lesson, and to an extent that may be true. But for certain tasks, like giving instructions or feedback, it's important to think about what language you might use. It will be confusing and difficult for students to follow if a teacher waffles or restarts a sentence because they're thinking on the spot. It also helps you avoid forming bad habits like, what does this mean, for every piece of vocabulary learnt. Classroom language will also be affected by the level that you're teaching and whether or not you need to grade your language. Above all, Imperial English courses promote learning English through English. The teacher is a model who the students can learn from. This includes learning functions like requesting, offering, and checking understanding. The teacher should therefore look for opportunities to exploit language use that is not always explicitly set out in the lesson. This could, for example, be how to give instructions for a game or a different way of expressing opinion. Classroom layout, if flexible, can really affect interaction and therefore language. Do you need to change the layout of your classroom or keep it the same? Why? Why would we change the layout? What tasks could this help with? And what kind of tasks suit different layouts? Assessment and feedback are also covered in the teacher's book. The assessment section advises how best to assess learners both during and after a task. This will be discussed further in a later session, but in terms of assessment that takes place during a lesson, you need to think about what you're assessing and how you'll do so. Feedback. The teacher's book also suggests what feedback you should conduct for each task. This will also link in with the interaction side of your planning. Feedback could be done as a group discussion, peer checking, nominating students, or the teacher directly giving the information. This again is something that can be adapted according to the group and what you notice during monitoring. What are the pros and cons of working from a course? Lesson planning with the Imperial English GES is made a little easier in the sense that lessons are ready-made and all the material is provided. However, this can lead to bad habits if you do not receive the correct training. Having the resources ready-made does not mean that you don't need to plan. The course has been carefully designed so that every topic is relevant, useful, and engaging for learners, and there is no task that is there for the sake of it. But it's important that you, the teacher, see the point of the tasks and warmers. If you just teach a task without thinking about why you're teaching it, the students will not see the point of it either. So let's look at an example of a warmer. Here on the slide, the teacher writes 5 or 6 answers on the board that are connected to their life in some way. For example, 35, London, pasta, swimming. Note that this information does not have to be true. Students should then discuss these items in small groups and think of what the question would be. For example, how old are you? Where were you born? What's your favourite food? And so on. We've discussed what the aims of warmers in general are, but what would be a more specific aim of this warmer? What could the language point be, or the lesson topic? Think about this for a moment or talk to a colleague. There are various lessons that this warmer could lead into, but one option is that it's a topic on exchanging personal information and the language point is formulating questions. What other warmers could you use to start a lesson on the topic of exchanging information and formulating questions? Think about this with your colleagues. Look at this example taken from Level 3 Intermediate. What's the aim of this task? Discuss with your colleagues or think about it for a moment. This task is designed to give students controlled practice in using some positive and negative modal verbs in context. We can see from the example that it's task 3, so presumably there will have been some grammar input of modals before this and some freer practice will follow. Now look at these other examples and think about what the aims are for each task. Here are the aims for each task. The first task, taken from Level 3 Topic 5 Task 1, aims to introduce students to the lesson topic of education and school, and the language focus of comparatives and superlatives to encourage students to express their ideas and opinions freely. The second task, from Level 3 Topic 9 Task 3, aims to focus students on phrases or chunks and how sentences fit together in terms of their grammar and collocation. It also introduces advice and feedback phrases to presumably be used later in the lesson. So let's look at a sample lesson plan. Let's say this is a 60-minute general English speaking lesson with a focus on exchanging personal information. Take 10 minutes to plan what activities you could do for this lesson. Now that we have our stages of the lesson, we need to think about the top section. What are the aims of this lesson? It's useful to use these sentence stems when creating aims. It keeps the focus on the learner and ensures that you're being realistic. Think about these aims and take a moment. The next is differentiation. What kind of differentiation might we need to consider here? Ideas might include stronger or weaker students, learning styles, background, difficult students, and quiet and loud students. What problems might arise in the lesson? Think about problems with the tasks themselves or the resources. This is the kind of detail we would expect from a lesson plan. It needs to be logical, accessible, and useful. A teacher that was called to cover your lesson with 10 minutes notice should be able to follow this plan easily. These are the hashtag words to take from this session. Write a short summary of the session using the hashtag words and examples where possible.